Well, hello and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, and I'd like to introduce back to the show our co-host from PackYourPixieDust.com. How are you doing today, Christy?
Hi, I'm well. How are you?
Not too bad. We're keeping you up late tonight, aren't we?
You know, our evening recordings, you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, but you were pretty spunky before we started recording, so I think you're going to make it through tonight. So, and not only that, being a little spunky, I think it's really the topic.
Oh, I'm really excited about this topic.
You want to introduce it?
Well, you're putting me on the spot.
I am.
So today we have Donna, who completed an Adventures by Disney trip to where, Donna? Where did you go?
We went to Australia with my husband and my 12-year-old and 10-year-old son.
I'm so jealous. And when did you go?
In December of 2018, over Christmas time.
So, not that long ago, 45 days ago.
Yeah, it was great. I still love it.
Do you guys still have your tans, or did you guys lose them already?
No, they're peeled.
Well, welcome to the show, Donna. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing your and your family's experience. Just to kind of jump into it, had you guys been on ABD before, an ABD trip before?
Yes, we had. This was our third ABD. And then my first one was in Arizona, Utah, about 3 years ago when my kids were much younger. And then my second was in the summer of 17 on the 10-night Mediterranean. It was a ABD add-on cruise. That was fabulous. And then this is my third one. So
you enjoy them?
Absolutely.
I always think the short ones in the United States, like the Arizona one, are like the teaser ABD tours. That's the one that gets you.
Oh yeah, yeah, and you learn how they spoil you and kind of plan things. And as you know, you're busy as a professional, and you don't have time to plan everything, and you just kind of make sure you get yourself there and take off and go.
That's so cool. Okay.
Well, before we jump into the show itself, Chrissy, why don't you talk a little bit about what ABD is, Adventures by Disney, since we normally focus on Disney Cruise Line.
Adventures by Disney is Disney's tour experience. So Mickey Mouse is not going to be on your tour. It is a guided tour trip where you go somewhere and you are with the same 20 to 40 people or however many people are on the tour. The cruises, ABD has cruises as well through river cruises in Europe, and there are more people in those groups. But it is their tour company where they take care of all the details. You fly to the place and then you get guided around by Disney professionals who get you through and show you what it is you need to see.
Just out of curiosity, Donna, how did you guys find out about Adventures by Disney? Was this something you started right away, or did you start with the cruise line, the parks, or how did you kind of fall into the ABD family?
Well, we started off with the parks because our kids were little. The typical family, you know, they're 2 to 4 years old. They go and they see all the parks and Mickey Mouse, and they love that. And you stay at the nice hotels, and you're enveloped in the whole Disney bubble. And then we started the cruises, and then we started branching out, and my husband started getting, grumpy and like, I want to do something different. So that's kind of how we started to branch out a little bit to different experiences as the kids got a little bit older.
Right, and I really want to talk to you about that as far as your kids' ages go, going down to Australia. So, but before we do that, how do you as a family pick your vacations? And what I mean by that is, how did you come up with Australia? And is that something that you guys sit down as a family discuss, or did you and your husband want to do it, or how do you guys do that?
Well, I knew my husband wanted to go back to Australia. He lived in Australia 2 or 3 years when he was a school ager in Alice Springs, in the very center of it. And he really wanted to go back, and he wanted to show the kids the area and things like that. So that was the motivation for this trip.
Steve, have you been to Australia?
I have. I've been there once when I was in the military, and I actually flew out to one of the places you went to, Donna, Ayers Rock, and I'm really excited to hear about your thoughts there. I've been to Sydney, and then my wife and I actually... Well, I got a confession. My dad has a cousin that used to work for Qantas that lives in Melbourne, and she's a travel agent, and so she really hooked us up into, we visited Australia for our honeymoon, so it's just a beautiful country.
And wow.
I think you've been there too, right, Christy?
I did. I went when I was 14. I have family that's there, and so we went in the summer, which is why I know I don't want to go back in the summer, and Australia does not have central heat. And so it was very cold. I remember that very clearly, how cold we were. Yeah, so I went in the summer, loved it, and I want to go back. I am dreading the flight, but I want to go back.
Yeah, the flights were not fun. That was the biggest hurdle that my family, we overcame it after we knew how much fun we would have once we're there. But that was the big thing,
Talking about the flights, before we get into that part of it, this is an 11-day trip that takes you through Australia. What does Adventures by Disney do for you ahead of time to get you to prepare for this trip, as far as like packing, and what did you guys do to prepare for it?
Well, the one thing that I would tell you is that when you go to Australia, you have to have a visa. The travel agent that I worked with did that about 3 months out. It was a very simple visa process. It was multiple questions like, have you ever been convicted? Just very basic things. But it wasn't like a China type visa where you didn't have to have photos or anything like that. So it was very easy there. They send out a booklet for each one, and the booklet that's mailed out a couple months ahead of time will have like a packing list in there. It'll tell you what things you need, like a passport, the visa, any documents if you're traveling with minors, if both parents don't travel together with them. The only thing that I would say that I kind of left out on that is I didn't think about a raincoat. Okay, you're going to a rainforest in part of the time, and it rains in a rainforest a lot. We could have that would have been very important to pack that we did not pack. But yes, they tell you to pack that.
Darn it.
I know.
That's one of those you're like, okay, well, that's a good lesson. So listen to that instruction. Pack that raincoat and maybe some rain shoes then. Waterproof shoes. So maybe Absolutely. Like when you're going to Alaska, a similar all-purpose type wear for some of those days.
Yeah, it was a variable. In December, it's like June here. We were able to do laundry, which I'll, talk about a little bit, during the time, which was very beneficial. But when we were in Sydney, which is further south, that is like being further north here. So it was chilly in the morning. And sometimes if it was overcast, we needed a jacket or a sweatshirt for that. And then also when it sounds weird, but when we were in the very center in the desert in Uluru, we needed a jacket for the early morning camel ride because it was before dawn and that was cold. That was kind of chilly and the kids were cold.
So you get the itinerary. You've got the itinerary ahead of time, and they kind of show you what you're going to be able to do during the different days, like while you're in the rainforest and doing the camel ride. Is that something that you pick before you go, or is that something that you do during the tour? And I mean the daily activities, as far as being able to plan what you're going to do through this tour.
Well, we don't really get to pick anything specifically. Everything is planned. Okay. So what you see listed is you can do. Now, there were a couple of days where toward the end of the trip in the Gold Coast, I frankly was getting tired. So my husband took the kids with the group for about a couple of hours, and I stayed back by the pool. And then one day toward the very end, he just needed a down day. So I took the kids and he stayed back behind. Most people went every day though, but you had the option if you wanted to stay at the hotel or didn't want to do a part of it, you could skip that part and do something on your own.
How did the kids do?
The kids did fine. I was surprised, but we did take, with a 10 and a 12-year-old boy, if you give them a fully powered iPad, they're generally happy. So they would, that was the same was true on the airplanes and some of the bus rides. We never gave them their iPads because that was the time where they could, talk to other kids or participate in some of the things that the guides were talking about. So they didn't have them on the bus rides, but definitely on the airplane rides we did.
Okay, well, let's jump into it from there. Then we'll start your adventure with the airplane ride. You guys live on the East Coast, I believe, all the way to Australia. That's quite a long ways. Did you guys stop on the West Coast and then on over? And what do you have any tips or any advice for people taking a trip that long with two younger kids?
Yeah, well, we left early in the morning from the Cincinnati area, and we got into LAX about 9:30. We had an 11-hour layover. So what I had done is I took a lift over to Marina del Rey. I had booked a day use. It was like I found it on day use website. It was a Jamaica Bay Inn where I booked a day room, and we were able to go up to Venice Beach Pier, walked around, had some lunch, swam. My husband took a nap. And then we were able to shower and then take a lift back to the airport before we had to check in. So we just used that as a day to kind of hang out in California.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, and the good thing about those flights, the majority of them leave in the evening, right, off the West Coast to head down there. So you kind of can spend that whole day there like you did to break it up. But you're leaving in the evening, so you kind of get that dinner, and then hopefully everybody kind of goes to sleep for a while.
Yes and no. I mean, we took our flight was at 11:45, so we were able to go, p.m. And then we were able to go into the Emirates Lounge. That was the one that serviced the Virgin Australia flights over. So we were able to get dinner and drinks beforehand. And that lounge, hands down, was awesome. That was amazing. I would like to have gone there on the way back, but we weren't able to get into that lounge on the way back. We used the Delta ones on the way back. So
okay, so you guys get over to Sydney, and that's where the tour starts. Did it start that day, or did you guys arrive a couple days ahead of time?
We arrived a couple days ahead of time. We flew into Melbourne on the 17th, which was a Monday. So we left and we got there 2 days later. And we got through customs, and then we flew up to Cairns, which is actually looks like Cairns, but Australians pronounce it Cairns. So what we did is we spent 2.5 days up in Cairns before we flew down to Sydney. So we'd already passed customs and everything else like that before the tour started.
And did you do some water activities? Like, did you go snorkeling or scuba diving or anything like that there?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Nice.
I had booked it was called the Kuranda Rainforest Journeys the first day we got in, because we got in about noon. And I just knew that if we didn't have something to do when we flew in, it was going to really mess with our sleep schedule. So kept us busy. We went out and we went into the rainforest. We booked a tour that ended up being a private four-person tour for just our family only. They picked us up at the hotel about 2:00. We drove up into the Kuranda Rainforest, and the kids, I was actually very surprised because I figured that the kids would ride on the ATVs with us. They got their own personal ATVs. And they were beyond excited. They had never ridden ATV. They'd never driven an ATV nor one. So that was really exciting. They showed us how to use them. We got to see these wonderful, it was a fruit orchard was what it was. It was a wonderful farm. And we got to see these giant old trees. We actually saw 2 cassowaries, which I don't know if you know what cassowaries are, but these are very kind of almost prehistoric birds. They have dinosaur-like feet, but they look like an emu. And they have this keratin, kind of almost a horn or a fin on top of their head. But they're beautiful, and you rarely ever see them. But there were 2 of them. And we basically got to take selfies 10 feet from 2 cassowaries. So while we were on the ATV tour. So that was really cool. And then our driver took us down and showed us how to throw boomerangs. And we got to throw boomerangs for like 30 or 45 minutes. That was an amazing tour. The kids were really stoked to start seeing Australia after that tour.
Just
great way to start.
Yeah, that was a fabulous way. That was a mom win right there.
Yeah, driving ATVs, throwing boomerangs. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, that's right up.
Get more Australia other than that.
Yeah. Okay, so you spend some time in Cairns, and eventually you make your way to Sydney, where the tour starts. Can you talk a little bit about how ABD how that all starts, how the whole tour begins?
Well, the tour begins, you fly into the Sydney airport, and they meet you with a orange paddled driver that will pick up your luggage and yourself and take you directly to it was a Shangri-La hotel about 20 minutes away. So in the lobby, what we found was that our guides, Suzanne and Drew, were waiting for us. And they had what's called Tim Tams. I don't know if you know what Tim Tams are, but they are delicious Australian cookies. And they gave us, that was our welcome gift, along with some maps and information about where to eat and food and things to do the first day before we actually did our official meeting at 3:00 in the afternoon.
I think most ABD tours actually start around 3:00 in the afternoon. So just to give an idea to people, that is when you're going to want to be with the rest of your group. for most of them. You could look it over, talk to your travel agent, talk to the booking, whoever did the booking for you, etc. But that does seem to be about the average time.
I'm trying to think when they told us we were supposed to check in, they were going to be available to check in there between like 8 and 2 or something like that. That was what the time frame that they were going to be in the lobby. So that was helpful.
I'm going to do a Christy here, a little pro tip there. You can actually buy Tim Tams here in the States now.
Oh, that's a bad tip. They're delicious.
At least out here on the West Coast, you can get them at Target, believe it or not. So, yeah, those are amazing.
Oh,
yeah, they are great.
That's really a bad tip.
Yeah.
That's a really bad thing to know. I'll have to check Target.
Yeah,
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, check Target in your area. So you don't have to fly all the way back to Australia to get your Tim Tams in. So, and if they don't, if you want me to send you some, let me know.
Oh, no, I really don't need any. They're delicious. Thanks. The one other thing that I will do, I know this may be off the recording, but we did 2 days on a liveaboard, and we scuba dove before we went down to Sydney.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So
no.
You just cut her off and rushed her along.
No, that's okay. But I just wanted to, if anybody
awesome.
wants to come in, you need to come in early, but that is an amazing way to do that. We had 3 scuba divers and 1 snorkeler in our group, and it was phenomenal.
And Donna, why don't you explain what a liveaboard is?
A liveaboard is actually a boat that stays out on the Great Barrier Reef that has small hotel rooms. It's like a small little, has a bed and a small bath, and then they have a dining area. But they also have all the scuba tanks and everything that is going to set you up, basically, so that you can dive and not have to leave the Great Barrier Reef, because it takes about an hour and a half to get out there. So you don't want to have to kind of waste all your time going back and forth. But in 2 days, we were able to do 6 dives. One was a night dive, and we saw white-tipped reef sharks, giant clams, turtles, all kinds of fish. It was amazing.
Oh my gosh.
It was the Reef Experience was the boat that we went out on, and they had about 40 divers on there. The weather could not have been better out there in Cairns. It was humid and hot, but it was dry, which will be, kind of a different than when we went back to Cairns later in the tour. But it was from 82 to 95, and that was a great way to kind of take off that jet lag and kind of get your feet, onto Australian time and your head in Australian time before you started the tour. So 3 days was really nice. That was a good time period to get there early.
Yeah, it sounds perfect, but you definitely don't want to fly in and jump into that tour that first day or even the next day. No.
Oh, no.
Okay.
I will say when I went to Australia, it took me a day and a half to stop sleeping, basically. Yeah. Like the one day we got there and I went to sleep at like 2 p.m. and slept until they woke me up to go to bed. And then I slept again into the next morning, and I eventually woke up, but I slept a lot that first day and a half. I just could not get adjusted.
Yeah. In the first 2 or 3 days, I woke up at 3 or 4 in the morning every single morning. So, I used that time basically to go run on my own before breakfast or before everybody was up and moving. So, and that.
How could you run on the liveaboard?
That was perfect. Oh, no, not on the liveaboard. The first morning I ran down to the Marlin Marina, down the boardwalk area along the ocean. I ran down and back, which is like 4 miles, just to kind of see where we were going to need to go when I took the whole family with me.
Yeah.
And then once I was in Sydney, down around Circular Quay, I could run in the morning 5 or 6 miles before everybody kind of got up and moving. That was great. It's a great way to see the city without all the people and the tourists and things.
Is that down by the Opera House where you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's the botanical gardens down there. One morning I wasn't able to get in, but one morning I did, and botanical gardens are beautiful. If you have a chance to go, it is phenomenal.
Well, let's jump into the tour itself.
Really quick, is it the water choppy at the Great Barrier Reef for the liveaboard?
Well, the first time we were there for the liveaboard, when we were out there the first time, it was wonderful. It was perfect. The weather was sunny. No, it wasn't choppy at all. When we went back for the tour, for the ABD tour, the day we were out there, they had 25 to 30 knot winds.
Oh,
and it was so choppy that you had to literally hold onto the snorkel rope so you wouldn't get pulled away.
Wow.
Yeah, we were very blessed having those first 2 days out there on our own.
Well, let's talk about the tour itself. Just before we talk about the specifics of what you guys got to experience, how many families were on this tour with kids and kind of kids your age? Yeah, one of the things that we get a lot is people are somewhat afraid to take younger kids on longer trips like this, and I know that you guys have done it, so it's not something that probably is in your mind necessarily. But how many families were there with younger kids like yours?
Well, I don't know the total with the younger kids, but there were a total of 11 groups and 37 people that were on the tour. There were 21 adults and 16 kids, and they were ranged in age from ages 6 to 17. So my kids had no problem having friends. I mean, that was the key to this tour, is that the kids almost immediately kind of bonded. They hung out together, and that became part of the tour.
And have you've seen that through your other two ABD tours, I'm guessing, as well, as your kids have kind of aged, being younger at first and now, kind of those mid-years?
Yeah, it was a little bit more difficult when they were younger because they were a little bit shyer and they didn't really want to jump in with the older kids. But as they got older, 10 and 12, my stars, that's a perfect age. Wouldn't hesitate to tell anybody to go to Australia with a 10 and 12-year-old.
Yeah, I'm going to star my notes. Maybe I could make that in the plans. For housekeeping, Disney, for this particular tour, has a minimum age of 4 and a suggested age of 7+.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, it depends on how your child travels and things like that, of course.
Yeah,
How'd the 6-year-old
I couldn't imagine
do?
a 4-year.
Oh, God.
Well, he did okay. He had an older sister. There were times when he was tired, but he actually even kind of, part of the time he bonded with my 9-year-old. Well, he was almost 10, so he was 10 at the time. But so he kind of hung out. But there were times when he was tired and Dad was carrying him. I could not imagine a 4-year-old on that trip. That would not be fun. Couldn't imagine for the parents.
Yeah, me either. Okay, so you have your first dinner, and they tell you, because almost all ABD tours start with a welcome dinner that first night.
Uh-huh.
They give you the lay of the land.
Yes. We actually walked down to Circular Quay. It's actually, it looks like Quay, Quay, but in Australian it's pronounced Quay. All of us walked down, and then we got on a ferry boat that took us across Sydney Harbor to the Taronga Zoo. And then we took the sky rail up to the top of the ridge that overlooked the Opera House and the Sydney Harbor Bridge. And we had a private guided tour after hours with all of, through the kangaroos and the koalas, the nocturnal animal enclosures, as well as the monotremes, which are like the egg-laying mammals, like the platypus and the echidnas. So and then they brought out like pythons and lizards to hold, and then we got dinner. So we had all the fun part first.
What time did you have dinner?
I'm not sure. We met to go to dinner, to get onto the ferry. We met in the hotel at 3:00. And then, so probably around 6, maybe.
Okay. So that's not like they weren't trying to feed you with the kids at 10 o'clock at night or something.
No. But dinner was amazing. It was a private room that overlooked the harbor, and you could see everything. And that was until the hailstorm came through. The entire harbor disappeared, and then it kind of reappeared about 15 minutes later. And that was really cool.
How do the guides kind of set up the tour from there? You guys meet, you go to the zoo, and then you have that first dinner. How do they kind of set up the rest of the tour? Do they kind of go over what you're going to experience at that point?
Absolutely.
Or what do they do?
Yeah, absolutely. At that point, they had an opportunity we'd all had some appetizers and drinks, and then we were all kind of milling about, meeting everybody. And then as we were sitting down to eat, they kind of started talking and telling us a little bit about the itinerary when we'd meet the next day. And then they brought up something that they were going to give us each $5, $5 Australian dollars per guest, because we were doing it over Christmas. They gave us money to buy for a white elephant gift exchange. So our job over the next 4 or 5 days was to buy Christmas presents for each other, and that was how we kind of went souvenir shopping. So that was kind of cool. That was neat. But they did tell us how things would kind of go, and that they would tell us each day what we would need to know for the next day.
And how do they do the food as far as for the kids and stuff? Do they have a lot of options for them as well, as far as, maybe some of the pickier eaters if the kids are younger?
Well, my son's kind of picky. My youngest one, he ate a lot of spaghetti and meatballs. And then my oldest one had a lot of steak because he likes steak. But they didn't really have a lot of problems finding food to eat. The breakfasts every morning were buffet style at the different hotels. And let me tell you, those breakfasts were amazing. I'll eat anything that is not Vegemite or a bug that's crawling. And it was amazing spread of food. I mean, Australia has a very Pan-Asian feel. If you've ever, you've been there. But, I mean, for breakfast, I had all kinds of different dumplings. I had some spring rolls, and I had a lot of vegetables, which was different. Like I said, I'll eat anything, but I found out that they had pumpkin everywhere we went, and it was delicious. But it turns out it was actually butternut squash. Huh. But they had traditional things. My husband eats nothing but bacon and eggs, so that's kind of his thing. And my kids are more normal yogurt or something fruit based, and they had that, of course, too. But it was great. If you're a soda drinker, I'm not sure how much soda you drink. I'm a Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi nut. You could occasionally find a Diet Pepsi or Diet Coke, but it was about $3 to $5 Australian dollars a piece. So I learned to drink hot tea. That was my drink of choice at that point. So a hot tea or coffee, water, things like that. And the kids could always have juice too.
Would you have had to pay for your own drink?
I think if I had a soda, I would have, because there were not very many soda. I mean, I didn't see very many in the way of sodas around the country.
Maybe because they don't want to use ice to put it in it.
If I could have found a Diet Coke, I would have had it warm.
That wasn't on the packing list?
No.
Make sure you pack your Diet Coke if you like Diet Coke.
Yeah, but get used to something different.
Yeah, no, I'm not making fun of you, Don. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. No, I think, soda around the world, it's kind of an interesting. We used to go to Egypt a lot, and it was a big production. If you got a Coke, it was very expensive. They'd come out and they would open it in front of you just to see that it kind of popped, so you knew that it was fresh. So I don't think that people in a lot of the countries around the world drink as much soda as we do. So it is kind of harder to find, isn't it?
In Italy, my husband's Coke costs more than my wine.
Yeah, I know.
Again, I learned to drink a lot of hot tea. It was very nice to get back to the U.S. when I could actually get a Diet Coke.
Yeah, but nice to experience something different while you're down there in Australia. So
absolutely. It was. I mean, you go with what and that's one thing it's great about travel is you go with what's there. It's like, okay, well, that didn't work. Try what the locals have.
Well, let's move into day 2. So you guys spent a couple days in Sydney. What did you guys do on the second day in Sydney?
Well, the second day was actually on our own. And they gave us some suggestions. I had run down around Circular Quay prior to everybody else waking up. And one of my sons had done swim practice up in the pool. Then once we got breakfast done with, our guides were actually down in the lobby and told us to come visit them for ideas. So the two things that they gave us an option, because the kids wanted to go to a beach. So we went to Bondi Beach. We grabbed a taxi, and then it was about 45-minute drive down to Bondi Beach. The interesting thing is that taxis and all the cars in Australia, they make you buckle up. There are sensors in the seats. If you don't buckle up, the taxi doesn't move. Huh. And they get fined. They told us, the taxi drivers, when we talked to them, they get fined if they don't actually have people buckled up. Or if they use their cell phone, they get fines and can lose their license.
Good.
So that's kind of interesting. I thought that was great. Another one was they recommended Manly Beach a lot. You had to take a taxi from Circular Quay over, and it was a little bit longer trip. We didn't have that much time. But Manly Beach, I heard, was actually a little better than Bondi Beach. But Bondi was cool, and we could say we'd been there. So that was why we went there. After we got back, let's see, we did not have to meet until about 11 for the Harbor Lunch Cruise. And what the Harbor Lunch Cruise was, that was with the whole group. We all met to go, again, down to Circular Quay, where all the ferries take off. And they had a lunch. It was a large boat with about 250 people on board, but they had a lunch buffet there. And then once we were done with the lunch buffet, we were able to go up top and kind of take in the sights of the Sydney Harbor, which it was kind of chilly that day and overcast, but it was great because all the kids started kind of bonding again, and we got to socialize with a lot of the ABD group while we were looking at all the things around us. After the Harbor Lunch Cruise, and kind of getting our bearings around that area, we went to the Harbor Opera House, famous opera house.
The Sydney Opera House?
Sydney Harbor Opera House.
Okay.
Which is actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site. They gave us all headphones for the tour, so we could listen. So we could look around and wouldn't worry about hearing everything. They told us some interesting facts. I mean, a few of the things. There's 10 shells. They call them shells. The sails, and they're all made of precast concrete, and they're covered with over 1 million of these self-cleaning Swedish tiles. Yeah, I mean, the architect actually it took about 14 years to build. And the architect never actually saw it completed in person because he was basically let go by the government before it. Jorn Utzon was the architect. He never actually saw it completed. Which is kind of sad.
Because it took him 14 years to have it built.
Yeah, and they got into a dispute about payments and control and things like that. So he basically was pushed out. That was the kind of the end of the organized day. At that point, after we got back out of the opera house. And then they kind of gave us some ideas because I wanted to see opal shopping was one of the things that Australia is known for. So the guides actually gave us some reputable stores to go to check those out. And so I found a little small souvenir. And the kids went back to the hotel just to kind of get cleaned up and to relax. They gave us some ideas for dinner that night. So we went to Jamie Oliver's Italian and got pumpkin roll ravioli. And they got spaghetti and meatballs. And then they told us a really cool Christmas light display at St. Mary's in Hyde Park. We taxied over there, but the jet lag was really starting to get us, and the kids just couldn't make it past 8 o'clock. I mean, it was 8 o'clock was when it was supposed to start, and by 7:30 they were complaining, we just want to go to bed. So we kind of, hit the hay early and then got an early start the next day. But Sydney was beautiful. I mean, I would go back in a heartbeat. It was very metropolitan. Everybody was wonderfully friendly there. And same thing all over the country.
What was it like being over there at Christmas time? Was the city all kind of lit up? Did they decorate quite a bit? Summertime over there, I know, but they're used to it being summertime for Christmas. But just kind of curious, what's it like at Christmas time over there?
I didn't see a lot of, there were some Christmas lights, but again, it was just kind of surreal because it was warm. Mm-hmm. And it just didn't feel like Christmas. So I didn't see a lot of it, but obviously they celebrate Christmas there. So,
right. So, okay. So you moving on to day 3, you guys are still in Sydney. What was kind of on the tour that day?
We again had, and this is one thing that ABD had told us ahead of time. And so we knew this. They recommended that if we wanted to do the Sydney Harbor Bridge climb, which we all wanted to go to climb to the top of the Sydney Harbor Bridge, that we booked this ahead of time. I had actually booked this about 3 months prior to our tour for a 10 a.m. departure. So there were multiple families on our tour that did that. So a lot of the people we were with were actually from our tour, which was kind of cool. And I would definitely recommend it. It cost extra. I don't know. I'm not sure. It was over $100 a piece, but it was worth it. It was great. They took us there. The most polite way to put this is they gave us changing rooms and told us basically to strip to our underwear because it was going to be hot when we put our jumpsuits on and harnesses. So we had a place to put all of our things, including phones, cameras, watches, Fitbits. Nothing could be except eyeglasses, and they would attach them because they didn't want anything falling under the cars below. Yeah. So that was a really neat tour, though. But one of the neat facts is we're high up above all the traffic, almost at the very top, is they said they only had 2 deaths from people falling off of it while they were constructing it from 1923 to 1932.
Oh, so it wasn't during one of the tours. I thought you were going to talk about during the tour.
No, that was just very comforting. We're tethered in by there's like an iron harness, tether or something. We're attached, but I was just like, oh, that's just really what I wanted to know. So,
and I'm glad I'm not the only one though that had that thought.
I know you and I were in the same wavelength there, Christy. I was like, we've only had 2 deaths. They were last week. We're good this week.
But yeah, but it was amazing just to see that bridge. And all that went into constructing that. That was phenomenal. And then they give tours every single day of the year except December 30th and the 31st when they prepare for the Sydney Harbor fireworks display. So that was really near around the time when we were there too. So that took about 2 hours. That took us to get, everything up and back. They took some photos. And after we got back, as we're going down, we saw this festival on the streets in the Rocks area. The Rocks area is this old area. It's kind of in the hill right next to the harbor, but it's kind of a hipster kind of area to go to. But they had a Christmas festival. So we had lunch there that consisted of kangaroo, emu, and crocodile.
Oh.
That was cool. And, the kids were less than enthused. And I think my youngest one, my oldest one tried everything. My youngest one looked at it and went, no. So, but that was lunch. And then we met about 1 p.m. And one of the kind of the weird things that I thought when I saw the itinerary is we were going to a sheep farm. And I thought, now, how can that be interesting? But that was actually one of the better days. I mean, it all was very good, but that was a really awesome day because we got to meet an Australian cowboy, so to speak, and they call them sheep stations. So we drove about 45 minutes out of town, out of Sydney, and then we learned the song. I don't know if you've ever heard the songs Waltzing Matilda.
Oh, yeah.
That is like a very common, kind of a folklore song in Australia. So we learned a lot of Australian slang, like what tucker bags were. And tucker bags are actually very important because on ABD, you have these snack bags or snack boxes that the guides give you snacks throughout the day. Well, they call them tucker bags. That's a snack bag or a food bag. We learned about billy tea, which is how they brewed tea over the campfire. Billabongs are like ponds, freshwater ponds. There were jumbucks, which are male sheep. They're just different things that we learned about. Just Australian street signs. They have El Camino-like cars called utes over there. We got to see just basically suburban Australia, which was really, that to me fascinates me. And then when we got there, we met our guide named Nick, who we had an entire private evening and afternoon with him. He had some amazing sheep herding dogs. And I don't know if either one of you have ever seen sheep herding dogs, but they are something to see. They could gather 100 head of sheep and put them exactly where he wanted them, just by a whistle. So that was cool. The kids all got to play with the dogs, and we took pictures with them. And the sheep, they went out and we fed the sheep. He actually gave us bull whips and showed us how to use bull whips. We all got to try it, and some were better than others.
What did you do with the bullwhip?
You learn to crack them. So the cracking is what actually will move animals to get them to move. And he would show us what he would do. Well, I cracked my hands multiple times before I decided, this isn't for me. I'll let somebody else crack the whips. But the kids enjoyed it. We did do a dinner afterwards. So that's where our dinner was, too. And we got to try different Australian beers. That was actually a fairly long day, but that was a really neat day. That was one of the better days because we got to see kind of a little bit about what Australia was like other than just the major cities. I never would have thought to even look for that had it not been for the tour. So that was where one of the tour things came in. Really, it wouldn't have been something I would have looked for. Mm-hmm. So,
is that part of the reason why you come back to ABD? Just those type of highlights that you don't really think about that they're going to show you from whatever destination you are, so you kind of get immersed into the culture down there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, nobody thinks to go to a sheep farm when you go to Australia.
Nope. I think you are correct in that.
Well, I'm pretty excited about the next destination, you guys. So you finally leave Sydney and you head up to Ayers Rock. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we took about a 3-hour flight, and they had warned us about luggage too. So we wanted to make sure that we weigh our luggage and make sure it's not overweight. But we had a 15-pound carry-on and a 44-pound maximum suitcase per person. Yeah, that's not a lot. We did do the flights, and I would say there's no Wi-Fi on board. So if you need to download anything beforehand, make sure you do it before you get on the flights. But when we got to Uluru Airport, which is called Ayers Rock. Uluru is the Aborigine name for it. But we stepped out onto a 95-degree desert tarmac. Whew. It's a one-runway airport, and you go into the airport, and it has Palia, which meaning good or greeting. We got met by the guides take care of our luggage, and they put everything on the bus, and we meet our Aboriginal guide. He's not an Aborigine, but he's an Aboriginal authorized guide that has to do all the talking. We meet him in the airport, and we get our lunch, and we head out to Uluru. We get to take pictures, and they tell us a little bit about what this big blob of rock is. So I never would have thought to ask what it is, but it's actually a sedimentary rock that is tens of thousands of years old that got solidified, and a tectonic plate shift shoved this thing 90 degrees down into the ground, exposing only 10% of it. So 90% of this rock is down, shoved into the earth that we can't even see. But we also found out just different facts about it. I mean, it's like an Anangu is the Aboriginal group that lives out there. It's a sacred site, so they don't want us climbing on it. And we got to take a 45-minute walk with their guide who showed us the cave drawings and different things around there, talked to us about some of the flora and fauna around that area. They gave us mozzie nets. I don't know if you all know what a mozzie is or not, but a mozzie in Australia is a mosquito. So they gave us mosquito nets to put on, and I thought, that's kind of weird. But there are flies that will drive you mad if you don't use them. So it went over our head to kind of protect us. They gave us lots of water. They told us make sure that, don't just take a new bottle of water, but refill your bottle. So Australians are very much into recycling and refill the water versus just getting a new bottle. But it was really a neat day.
I guess I would say I would encourage anybody, if you haven't seen Uluru, Google it, because it's an amazing site. We flew in there when I was in the military. We actually flew in there for the day, and we didn't get to do what you did to go walk around it, but we could see it from a distance. And it's a UNESCO heritage site, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful place.
Yeah, and it's sacred. I mean, they don't want you messing with it. And as of September of this year, they have basically eliminated and stopped anybody from climbing up on the rock. So it's kind of coming up pretty soon, but they just feel like it's kind of like going up to the Notre Dame in Paris and climbing up on the altar. So
what were some of the other highlights that you guys had while you were there for your 2 days?
That night, they took us out we got to an amazing dinner. I mean, the food was awesome, but we got to, at the hotel, the Sails in the Desert it's out in the middle of nowhere. There is nothing out there. But the local Aboriginal groups run that. But we got to have dinner out there, and we got to try a really wide variety of Australian things, including kangaroo. And then they took us out they had set up a telescope. So this was a full moon, and we got to see the Southern Hemisphere stars and the moon and hear someone talk about the astrology in that area. So that was really nice. That was beautiful. I mean, you could see stars everywhere out there in the desert sky. So that was awesome. And then we turned in early because we had a 4:45 start the next day, a.m. We got up and we went out to ride camels at sunrise. They put 2 of us per camel on, and it was chilly that morning. But we got out and we walked around the desert on the camels and got to watch the sunrise. We got to see Uluru, and we also got to see the other rocks that we were going to see later that day called Kata Tjuta. But that was beautiful. I mean, and we got to, and then we went, later that morning, we went on a Walpa Gorge walk, which was kind of unguided. It took about an hour, but we got to walk around the Kata Tjuta. There were 36 monolith formations, these giant rocks that were just kind of, looked like they were dropped into the middle of the Australian outback. And that was really neat to watch that and see that. After that, we hopped a flight out of that airport into Cairns, and it was another 2 to 3 hour flight. And in the evening, we got into the Cairns area. That was where I learned that raincoats were a must, because for 3 days it rained like I've never seen it rain. My feet were wet, my body was wet, and they had given us, when we arrived, they gave us plastic ponchos for the people who hadn't planned well, like myself. So every night we were drying the plastic ponchos, and then we would fold them back up and take them for the next day to get wet.
Oh no.
So that was awesome. I mean, it was, yeah. And then on the way to the resort, they told us a couple of tips. They said, Queensland has absolutely beautiful beaches, but you really need to stay off the beaches because the deadly stingers, there's box jellyfish, they're called stingers that can kill or maim you.
Oh.
And if they don't get you, the saltwater crocodiles that lurk in the shallow waters might. So I was like, well, awesome. That's fabulous. So, and they basically said, okay, the pools, if you want to get in the water, get in the pool. Don't get in the ocean. We're like, okay, no problem. So,
wow. Another housekeeping note is that when an Adventures by Disney trip has an inner adventure flight, all of that is included, and the transfers and everything are included in your Adventures by Disney price.
Yeah.
So you're not shelling out. Yep. You're not shelling out extras for that.
Yeah. And they took care of our luggage and got everything moved and arranged and things like that. So it was just seamless. It worked. It was great. When we got into the hotel room, I will talk a little bit about the Pullman Temple Cove. It is a beautiful resort. It is set up so that you can walk anywhere in the resort almost and not get wet. I understood why. Because it rained. That was Christmas Eve. That was our fifth day. And that was when we had all wrapped our white elephant gifts. And we went to a dinner that night. And that was supposed to be our junior adventure night where the guides took one of the guides took the junior adventures and the adults would go off and do their own thing. But because it was Christmas, they just mixed us all together and we did the gift exchange. That was wonderful. That was one of the best, most fun nights. We laughed. They had almost an open bar. I mean, they had delicious foods. And the guides actually did keep the kids quite entertained while we all just laughed and talked together. So that was a wonderful addition. Now, everybody won't have that, but just because it was Christmas, that was kind of what we did.
What kind of a special way to spend Christmas Eve? I mean, or at least a different way,
Oh,
with a group, with just a great group of people like that, it kind of experiencing the travel that you had. It just sounds like kind of a wonderful night.
It was so much fun. The group of people that we had on that trip, everybody was, I would say most of the adults were probably in their, 40 to 50 range. And they had, school age to teenage kids. There was one couple that didn't have kids with them. And then one lady who was single, and she was with our group too. So, and they had just as much fun as everybody else. So when you hear about, I don't want to go because I don't have kids. I don't want to go by myself. Don't worry about it. You'll have a blast. It was great.
The weeks when the kids are not in school, and in the summer, there will be more kids on the Adventures by Disney tour. So just for everybody to know. So it's not going to be that all of the tours are just two families without kids. There are a lot. And then Adventures by Disney also does adult-only tours for some of their trips. So they'll have exclusives only for adults. So if somebody is looking for an adult-only trip, that exists as well.
Christmas Day, there was nothing else open, so we had no options. But it rained and it was windy. That was our reef day. That was the day everyone was looking forward to. We went out to the reef on a boat with about 450 passengers, and it was the roughest. I mean, the helicopter tours were canceled, and we had a private marine biologist who was going to go out and snorkel with us and tell us all about everything. And that was really tough for her to do too. We had booked 2 tank dives to scuba dive. And after the first one, they refunded our money for the second one because it was so rough and the visibility was low. Our guide, Drew, had an underwater camera, but on the way back, there were probably a quarter of the boat that was getting sick. Our guides had pre-medicated anybody that thought they were going to get sick. They had given us anti-nausea medicine, so that was wonderful. But there was a lot of people getting sick on that boat. But there was nothing we could have done about it. There was nothing. So, I mean, but that was the day that everybody was looking forward to.
Did they redo it for you the next day, or did they just kind of pick up the tour with the next day?
Yeah, we really couldn't do it. I mean, I talked to the guides and several of the guys, and we talked to them and said, was there any way we could have flipped the days or anything like that? And they said no, because in Cairns, everything was closed. The next day was Boxing Day, which is a big day in Australia as well. Everything was closed. So there was no way to flip it. There was no really backup plan. So, and that was, it was unfortunate, but it was what it is. I mean, you go with the flow.
Once again, it was a good thing that you guys were up there a couple days beforehand, so you got to really experience Cairns and see the reef out there.
It was beautiful. I mean, anybody that I told people, I said, if you ever have a chance to go back, it's not always like this. It's gorgeous out there.
So what were some of the other highlights the next day, I guess, when you finished your last day at Cairns?
Yeah, I mean, that was a Jabakai. We got to go to an Aboriginal cultural center. We did face painting. They did didgeridoo performances for us. We got to start fires. And we got to paint our own returning boomerangs. And they actually do work. We tried those after we got home, and they were wonderful. That was how the morning was spent. And then we went up on the Kuranda Sky Rail, which was one of the longest sky rail gondola systems in the world. And we got to go over the rainforest into the Barren River Gorge. And that was beautiful. We got to go into the Kuranda koala gardens where we got to hold them. I mean, if you paid for it, you could get an extra picture taken with them and stuff like that. But we got to go do some shopping in Kuranda, and then we got to see all of just basically the kind of the Aboriginal things. We tried meat pies. The guides bought us all ice cream. We got some Australian hats, that was a neat kind of a thing too. So, and then that night we had this was our big thing for this night, was a private guided tour in the Hartley's Crocodile Farm. So we were on our own in this place and we got on these boats. They were well fortified boats, but they took us around the Crocodile Lagoon. And let me tell you, there were crocs in there. They baited them so we get to see them get up out of the water. They talked about how they would go through every day and pull the crocodile eggs out of their nests. Let me tell you, I wouldn't want that job.
Oh my God, right?
Because if you didn't, you'd have all these baby crocodiles coming out of this fenced area, and the neighbors wouldn't like that very well. So they raised them in captivity, and then we had dinner that night. So this was really neat. That was a neat night. We got to hold some baby crocodiles and they brought out some pythons and things like that. So that was neat too. That was that day. That was the next day, and that was cool. The kids really enjoyed that, and I did too.
So from there, you guys move on to the Gold Coast. Is that the name of the town?
That is. Yeah, that's the name of the town. And that's actually the name of the airport, too.
Okay.
We got on a flight. It was about a 2.5 hour flight, and then headed down there to sunny, warm, 82 degrees. It was like a Miami Beach kind of. It had high rises. It was a beach-like atmosphere. So that was definitely different than the rainforest. That was the day, that afternoon, what they did is they took off and did the jet boat ride. The kids did. And that was the day that I just kind of hung back at the hotel pool and had a couple of 4X Golds, which are Australian beer. And that was my idea of hanging out at the Sheraton Grand Mirage pool.
That was your day to relax, huh?
Yeah. That was my 2 hours of no kids and just chill. So that was awesome. The kids, before they took off, we got to go across the street we grabbed some lunch, though, at Macca's. And I don't know if you know what Macca's are. Have you ever heard of that? But that is actually that's Australian. That's what Australians call McDonald's.
Oh.
That was cool to go into a McDonald's because it was similar, but not exactly like what it is here. So that was neat. So I grabbed lunch real quick, and then the kids played at the pool after they got back from the jet boat ride. And then we had dinner on our own that night, and we went to just a local kind of Fisherman's Wharf was the name of it, and we tried barramundi. Barramundi is their local white fish, which was really, really good. So, and that was kind of our evening. We went with another family. We just kind of hooked up and said, "Hey, do you want to go over together?" And then the kids hung out, and we did too. So that was a nice end to that night. We had another day. The next day, my husband took the day off, and then the group and I went out to Byron Bay, which is kind of an old, kind of a surfer, hippie kind of vibe town. And we got to go kayaking for about an hour and a half, 2 hours out to the beach. And it was beautiful. It was like a deserted beach, and we got to see some of the local wildlife and the trees around the area and just basically kick back. We saw there were a lot of locals. They had a carnival around the area in one area off from the beach. And then just kind of got to go, after that, we went up to see the Byron Bay Lighthouse, which is at the easternmost point in Australia. We had a little bit of a ride that day. So this is kind of where ABD comes in, because what they did to take up that hour and a half, 2 hour ride on the way back to the hotel, we played Jeopardy. So we divided the bus up into left and right halves. And then we had questions like, I'll take Uluru, geography for 200, and then, so it basically kind of was like a quiz on what you'd done throughout the trip and what you'd learned throughout the trip, including things that you wouldn't know about the guides. So you kind of have to guess and see which guide was actually did which thing. So that was really neat. That took some time. Well, that killed some time because it was a long drive. It was a long drive back to the hotel. So that it kind of distracted you a bit was the best way I could put that. The next day we did this is our 10th day. So this is actually our last day before the end of the trip. We divided into 3 Mercedes 4-wheel drive buses, and we went to an area called Mount Tamborine. We went through an area where they had just wild kangaroos hanging out, and we didn't see any koalas, but there were koalas supposed to be in the trees. So that's what we were all looking for. We got to stop and just to kind of see the overlook area, just to look out over the Gold Coast. And then we did a walk into Curtis Falls, which is into a rainforest areas. And then they took us to a private campground for a barbecue lunch. And the kids all kind of stripped and jumped into the river and kind of like a little billabong pond kind of area. And that was a really nice low-key kind of day. So that was what, because everybody was starting to get tired. So that was really a nice way to do that. And then we kind of headed back to get cleaned up so we could do our final dinner that night.
And before we talk about that, what did you? Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'm just as you're talking, I'm looking at like each day and what you guys did, and it seems like you get up, you go on an adventure, and then for the most part, they kind of give you a little bit of time off, and then you get back together again in the evening. Do you like that kind of pacing?
Well, I mean, sometimes it's just nice just to have a chance to get a shower.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you're kind of dirty some days, and it's been raining, and it's just nice to have your hair cleaned up or change clothes or put dry shoes on.
Yeah, it's like. This is a weird segue, but that's what we like to when we've gone to Disneyland just recently. We've kind of like we get up, we're busy in the morning, and we kind of go back and kick back and relax a little bit, and then we do stuff in the evening, and that just really works well for our family. And I'm looking at like this tour, and it's kind of like that's the way they've designed it. It's kind of a nice way to travel. I was just curious what your thoughts were.
Yeah, no, I was. I mean, but the time we got to Gold Coast, we had been going for almost 14 days.
Yeah.
And we needed, I mean, we were getting tired.
Yeah.
I mean, we really were getting tired. And that's why I took an afternoon off and Darren took a day off. He went and walked and got a haircut, just to kind of do just something normal.
Right.
But that was what was so great about it, I mean, and, but they kind of told us a day ahead of time kind of how the layout would go. And on the day back on the bus, when we were coming back from the last day, they kind of told us about what times our airport transfers would be. Because it took about 2 hours to get, an hour and a half, 2 hours to get from Gold Coast up to Brisbane Airport beforehand. And the guides kind of separated at that point. So we kind of had our time where we had a designated pickup person, just be in the lobby, have your luggage there. And then that's how you did it. So we had a late day.
They said, farewell, get out.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. But there were 2 families, and we didn't plan this, but there were 2 families that had opted to have their 12-year-old kids. One was a girl, and one was my son. We went up and we did private surfboard lessons for like 2 hours, and he had a blast just learning to surf, and he thought that was the best thing. So, I mean, we did lots of fun stuff and things, but, occasionally just some of those random things that we threw in to fill time were, just some favorite things. Now, you couldn't do that with a whole ABD group, but that was a nice, just, fill some time kind of thing. So,
well, let's talk about before we end it, let's talk about the farewell dinner and how that kind of runs. Because I think that's kind of a special moment, isn't it?
It is. And it's really sad. It's always sad. And you try not to cry because everybody's, the guides always, kind of encourage the kids to thank their parents. And, the kids give us all hugs. And I've seen that several times. And it makes me cry every time because that's the whole point. Like if I can give my kids travel, that is my job is well done. That's what I love. But they airdropped, they made like a 15-minute slideshow of the highlights of the trip with the different family members doing funny things. And then at the end, they just kind of airdropped that back to our iPhones. And then we also got there was like over 1,000 photos that they took. So then you could go through online afterward and then pick out your family photos, so that if you didn't want to have to take your camera and take every single picture, they were taking pictures for you, which was a really nice benefit.
Did you want to talk about things that they did well and not so well?
The things that they did well, I mean, I would say the things that ABD does the best are the private experiences. The sheep station. Again, never in a million years would I thought that would have been something really special. Sheep Station was really special. I mean, just the private experiences, the zoo experience, the dinner at the Taronga Zoo that night, those are where ABD excels. The things that I would say that I liked probably the least were the large group things where we were mixed in with many, many, many other tourists. Like the Reef Day boat had 450 people on board. The boat for the Sydney Harbor had probably 250. It was a bit crowded, and it wasn't as personal. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't like there were locals there. It was tourists, so it wasn't, you weren't missing like a local vibe. You were just mixed in with a lot of other people. And I think that they could do better if they were just to substitute a little smaller venue, a smaller boat, perhaps.
I'm kind of surprised that they did that. That's the one thing that my aunt told us, and because they had we stayed at Port Douglas, which was just north of Cairns, for about 5 days, and the one thing that she said was make sure you get on one of the smaller boats when you go out to the reef, and you could definitely see like the great big huge ones, and we found a smaller one. So I'm surprised that they didn't do something like that. But
and we had that experience when we went on the reef experience was the boat that we went out on. And we had already had that experience. It was a very, intimate kind of a private experience. And then we went out and it was much bigger. And I was like, you really could tell the differences. And I think that's probably the reason that I noticed it. I don't know that everybody would have noticed it, except my kids, I don't know, for lack of a better term, they called it the puke boat because everybody was throwing up that on the way back. It was pretty bad on the way back. On the way out, it wasn't that bad because they had fun and they were outside, before it got really rough. And then once it got rough, then that was kind of the end of it, the end of the fun.
Well, kind of looking back at it before we finish up here, what were some of your kids, when you were just talking about it maybe over the last couple of days, what were some of the things that they really remembered, or what were some of their favorite things? Do you remember? Well,
I mean, I know that both of them enjoyed the reef. Being out on the reef was one thing. They loved the sheep and the sheepdogs, and they really liked being with the kids. Mm-hmm. I mean, having other kids other than mom and dad to hang out with, was the reason that I did this, and that was what they enjoyed too. So that was neat as well. So that was kind of what they enjoyed.
Yeah, I think when we did our Mediterranean cruise, it was the same way. We spent 4 or 5 days in Rome prior, just as a family, and it was fun. We had a lot of fun. It's the first time I think that we'd really spent time in a foreign city together as a group, just kind of traveling around. But once we got on the Magic and did the 7-day cruise through the Med, the kids really appreciated their own time with kind of kids their own way. So I totally understand what you're talking about with them bonding with the kids on the tour.
Yeah, and after 15 days with your kids, with your mom and dad, you just, and 14, 15 days with your kids or your spouse, you're just ready to find somebody new to talk to, Nice. I love them dearly, but that's, that was nice to meet. And there was such a wide variety of wonderful people on this tour. Everybody was very active and couldn't have had a better group. This is one of the best groups that I've had so far. So that was why I booked another one. I booked the Danube River Cruise just for my husband and I, because I thought, I need that experience again. That was really wonderful.
So looking ahead, what do you guys have planned coming up then, Donna?
Well, that's one this in June. the Danube River Cruise. My kids are going to go off to camp, so my husband and I are going to, at the end of June, we're going to take off to Munich and head on the ABD River Cruise that goes to Budapest. And then after that, because my husband, I've used up all his vacation, he complains, I'm going to take my kids and my mother-in-law and sister-in-law to the 7-night fantasy Southern Caribbean cruise at the end of July this year. So those are the things I'm most excited about.
Wow, you've got just an amazing year ahead of you in 2019. It sounds like just like Christy. Christy's got about 1 million things going on too. So, well, thank you so much, Donna, for coming on tonight. I really hope you've enjoyed coming on and talking about your experiences. I know our listeners are going to love hearing all about this. And we would love it if you'd come back on when you get back from the Danube and from your fantasy tour or fantasy cruise to come back on and share your experiences again, if you would.
Oh, I'd love to. I love talking about travel.
I think that's why we do the podcast, right, Christy?
It is.
It is. So.
Thanks again, Donna. Your excitement from this trip came out, and even when you were talking about saying goodbye, even my eyes teared up a little bit, and so all of
that makes me cry. My kids made me cry. They're like, "Oh, they hugged me and say thank you, Mom." You know, like, "Oh."
See, you're gonna get my eyes again. But we appreciate that, and I love that you are even this excited, even talking about it a second time. That's fantastic.
Yes, that's fun. No, I enjoyed it. But I appreciate you having me rein me in because I could talk. I mean, it's just hard to pin down what do you say? I mean, that's hard part. What do you say?
No, you did awesome, Donna. So, well, thanks for coming back on, and
no problem.
We look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right. Appreciate it.
All right. Good night.
All right. Good night.
Well, that's going to wrap up our show today. Once again, I really want to thank Donna for coming on and sharing her and her family's amazing trip down to Australia with Adventures by Disney. Of course, you can always go over to Adventures by Disney website, adventuresbydisney.com, to find out all of the amazing destinations that they offer trips to. Of course, they also offer those river cruises, and we look forward to hearing Donna and her husband's trip report when they get back this summer on the river cruise that they're going to take. And they also offer add-on and kind of before and after adventures with Disney Cruise Line as well. So make sure you go over there and check that. They offer just some amazing adventures over in Europe up to Alaska, and they just recently in 2020, in the summer of 2020, they're going to start adding Adventures by Disney down to the Caribbean as well. So we just launched our Patreon page. For those of you out there who would like to partner with us and support our show, you can find all that information over on Patreon. And if you know somebody else who would enjoy this show that you'd like to pass it on to, we sure would appreciate it if you would pass it on to them. Or go over to iTunes if you have time and leave us a review. That really helps us get the show known throughout the cruising and the Disney community as well. So between now and our next show, if you guys are heading out on your next vacation, all of us here at the DCL Podcast would like to wish you fair winds and safe travels as you head out on that next adventure. Once again, thanks for coming back and taking a listen, and we'll see you next time on the DCL Podcast.